You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskins, your host as always. This week we have a very special episode. It is one whole episode with one expert, and that is my friend Mark Anderson of Hub Residential. Mark is in to chat today not only with our suburb spotlight on Nedlands, which we'll get to later, but first off as a subject matter expert on the western suburbs. A bit of a market analysis, I guess. Not too much on, a data perspective, but more of an on-the-ground, anecdotal, hitting the street sort of perspective with regards to what's happening in the community, how the new rezonings along Stirling Highway have been taken up in terms of the feedback, what's going on with regards to prices, how many people are getting into home opens, how COVID's hit, all those sort of things. Mark, thank you very much for coming in, mate.
Yeah, hi Trent. Thanks very much for having me.
When we think about the western suburbs, we think about lots of local governments, probably too many local governments, some would say.
Yeah,
we think about lots of planning policies, but we also recognise it is Perth's most affluent area with fantastic river access, beach access, a very tight highway with some issues there on congestion, and obviously some of Perth's most beautiful houses, some of Australia's most beautiful houses.
Yeah, Trent, there are, I guess we are fortunate. We've got a river that fronts along Crawley, Nedlands, Claremont, right all the way down really to North Fremantle. Then we've got the ocean on the other side. So, some beautiful homes.
Are there different cultures? Are there sort of different subcultures within the western suburbs culture, I guess? From an outsider, a Morley boy back in the day, I would look at that area, especially when I went to university at UWA. You call it the Golden Triangle, right?
Yeah, it's called the GT.
The GT, right?
Yep.
And for me personally, I would see it as a very insular place where most of the things, if you're a kid that grew up in the GT, you never really left it because all your friends were there in private school down the road. All the things you needed were at Claremont Quarter, or you went to that beach just down the road or the river. You didn't really need to leave it, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, not that I was brought up in the GT. I was brought up in a place far different from the GT. But, having my kids are now 23 and 20, so they've obviously grown up in the GT. And, yeah, it would be fair to say that, all the kids that they know all live within that sort of area.
So those subcultures, would you suggest that someone who decides to live in a Nedlands is different to someone who lives in a Dalkeith, who's different to someone who lives in Mosman Park or Cottesloe? Can you give us a little bit of representation? Imagine that you're someone from Sydney right now listening in and trying to understand the western suburbs. How will you characterise, without being too stereotypical, what the different offerings are, I guess, and what people are attracted to those areas?
The thing is that every suburb has its own appeal. People who are, Nedlands is seen as a very stable suburb. We've got people which are business owners, professionals, university, medicos. So that's, they're the people which are typically living in that Nedlands area. They are drawn there because it's probably, as at a square metre rate, it's probably one of the cheapest suburbs within the Golden Triangle, if you like, western suburbs. And then if you look at Dalkeith, that is perhaps a little bit more aspirational. So people know Dalkeith as being one of the most expensive suburbs within the state. And then you go to Claremont. Claremont's just a huge suburb. It goes, it's massive. But certainly there are parts of Claremont. One of the most attractive things about Claremont is that when it was first established, which would have been in the late 1800s, Nedlands and Dalkeith were just really farmland at that point. And then you go a little bit further up the highway or down the highway, then you've got Peppermint Grove, and which everybody knows, Cottesloe on the other side. Cottesloe used to be a suburb that attracted farmers. Now it's become one of the most aspirational suburbs within the Golden Triangle.
It's really shot through Cottesloe, hasn't it? The last sort of 10 years, I feel like Cottesloe has been the bolter in the western suburbs. A lot of beautiful new homes being built, a bit of conjecture around skate parks and things like that. Yeah. What it demonstrates, though, is that if there's an issue about we need a skate park, there's also an upcoming youthful subculture or socio-demographic in the area too that hopefully can invest into that area. Because the one thing that you don't want is just one old socio-demographic in one area. You want variety.
Look, I think, Cottesloe is really interesting. It has been a leader suburb for a long time. All the other suburbs look to that one as a bit of a leader. It does offer a couple of cultures within that culture of the suburb, and that is that it offers people which are downsizing from the larger blocks of Nedlands and Claremont and Peppermint Grove will be drawn to Cottesloe because it will give them lifestyle. And then you'll have the people which have always wanted to be in Cottesloe because they use the beach every day. So you've got that culture where you're not going to be as stuffy. They're going to be a bit more lifestyle orientated.
Now, if I can use a different analogue, for example, in the city of Melville, what we find, we had a great chat with Michael Jennings, I think it was at the start of the year, talking about how someone might first enter the area in maybe a Willagee and then move into Melville and then move across to Adelaide and Bicton, and that would be, I guess, the cycle of property ownership as they increase their salary and those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
In the Western suburbs, do you have a similar pathway, or do
Absolutely.
people generally seem to stick to their own suburb?
No, they don't. Someone will probably start off in Mount Hawthorn. From there, where the blocks are roughly around 491 square metres and a bungalow, sell there and either split off to Floreat or come over to Nedlands. They might go to Nedlands north of the highway, which is the cheaper side. And then from there, they'll go to Nedlands south of the highway, buy themselves a larger block. Kids will grow up, go to local schools. And then from there, those people will probably then move from Nedlands either back to the other side where it's a smaller block or back to Subi. Or if they've done well, they'll then move on to either Dalkeith or they'll go to Cottesloe or Swanbourne.
Either a city change or a sea change in that space.
Yeah.
When it comes to the last 5 years of property prices, the median property in Perth has dropped nearly 20%. I would say the average property in Perth has dropped more like 10 to 15%. But what we can see is a characterisation where most of the suburbs in the western suburbs have been more insulated by those drops. And there's obviously been some drops, there's been some holds as well. You look at, for example, not so much western suburbs, but at Wembley Downs, they've actually gone up every year in the last 5 years because of the demand and supply in that suburb. Now, my perspective on that is because you only lose when you sell, and the good thing about, I guess, the socioeconomics in that area is that people in the western suburbs generally aren't pressured to sell. They sell when they want to most of the time. Therefore, you haven't seen that much downward pressure from sellers compared to buyers. Do you have any other perspectives on why that might be, just generally that the top suburbs in Perth, the more premium suburbs, are, I guess, more insulated from more macro issues?
Look, I 100% agree with you, Trent. What it is what we're seeing at the moment even, we are seeing that sellers, if they don't get the price they want, then they'll sit on their hands and do nothing. So therefore, currently I think our median prices right across the western suburbs have been maintained. And in some cases, even I'm looking at the first 6 months of 2020, the Nedlands median prices increased from last year.
Well, there's got to be some reasons for that, and that must be what happened a year ago in the rezoning. And we can talk about that in the Suburb Spotlight more specifically. Is that a conversation, therefore, that you have a lot, is you'll go and appraise a property and you'll just have a lot of sellers that go, well, look, I was open to selling, but I'm not going to sell it for that, and I don't need to.
Really, about selling real estate is being able to match the buyer with the seller at the price that both parties are happy with. Recent transactions, I've been looking at it and I've been going, well, back in 2007, 2008, if I fell asleep then and woke up today, we're about the same. There may be some lift. I think that really what's happening, what we see in the western suburbs, that people are, for what I've just explained about that property ladder, they will either buy and sell because the house is too big, the house is too small. I want to be closer to the schools, and of course the other, typical reason why people sell, and that is for other circumstances.
Death or divorce.
Yeah, death or divorce. We're certainly not getting into too many from a travel point of view. However, we are starting to see a lot of people getting a lot of interaction online from people from overseas that are now starting to look back at Perth as going, well, okay, I've had enough of living in England or Spain or other countries. I want to get back to Perth.
With regard to the lifestyle in the western suburbs, could there be a few more, for example, Woolworths and shopping centres? You look at Canning Highway, for example, and they've just put in a brand new Woolworths in Mount Pleasant. I guess they're gearing up for more density and for a bit more of a cosmopolitan lifestyle. And one thing that I think we lack in the western suburbs, especially along Stirling Highway and even on Broadway, is a gentrified, rejuvenated cosmopolitan lifestyle. The money's certainly there. If the cafes were there, surely they would come.
Well, it's really, really interesting because I worked in the Subiaco and Shenton Park area for a long time. The people that were buying in Subiaco and Shenton Park, I would offer them Nedlands as an alternative because it was cheaper, and they would use the word Deadlands. And the reason why they said that is because the cafe culture was almost non-existent. And I think that with the newly zoned stretch along Stirling Highway, the Nedlands Council looking at creating a Nedlands town centre with Woolworths and Aldi just up the road. This is what's going to bring people to the suburb and give people a reason to actually go there as opposed to just drive straight past and go down to Claremont.
Well, that's what happens a lot, isn't it? You can spend 2 minutes and you've totally missed Nedlands. You've totally, you go in the same point. If you're someone who lives in Dianella and you're heading to the beach and you go on a cot, you could, stream straight through 4 suburbs and you wouldn't have never have driven in a suburban street in those suburbs.
If you look at the stretch from the city, as you drive out along Riverside Drive, you come across, you drive through Crawley without even realising it. You come to Nedlands and there's still no town centre. And so the first town centre that you get to is Claremont.
Bayview Terrace.
And then the next one is Cottesloe.
The Albion would be the landmark there.
Absolutely. So those two are your only town centres within the whole of the western suburbs.
Don't you think that's a shame?
I don't think it's a shame. I think
is it engineered that way?
I don't know whether it was engineered that way. I think that that's just the way it has been. I think that a change is always good, but it also has to be thought about so that it actually benefits the suburb. And I think Woolworths, which is the Captain Stilling hotel site, which is going to be redeveloped, and Aldi, I think that is, and also maybe a town square a bit further down. I think that suburb of Nedlands will certainly benefit, and I think other suburbs will benefit from it as well.
When we think about touching on that development opportunity along the whole of Stirling Highway, the front runners really have been applications and even developments that are going up in Mosman Park, Glyde Street, around that area there, and also flagging Blackburn purchasing the old Amana site on Airlie Street in is it Claremont, but it's really more Peppermint Grove, isn't it?
No, it's right on the border.
Yeah.
So the next street is McNeil. And that is Peppermint Grove.
There's always going to be pushback, I think, for any big development. One thing I know about the way that Blackburn develops things is they really do try to create a community vibe. They do try to create a whole lot of facilities and lifestyle. That's their offering, right? Do you think that once the dust settles and we see the proper plans, that they'll start to be well received? Because surely they're much needed services. If you are a downsize in the western suburbs, there's not many options for you.
No, and look, downsizers don't all want apartments. So I think that's something which a lot of people or developers may be missing. Is that if you talk to a lot of downsizers, they're talking about smaller blocks. Now, smaller blocks have been around 350 square metres and up to maybe 500 square metres. They're looking to build or have a house on that size block. They don't want to give up completely their access to gardens or having 3 cars or 2 cars and a boat. So I think that what Blackburn is doing in Claremont, I think is certainly is needed. It'll draw people into the suburb. It won't only draw people from within the suburbs. I can see the point of view of the people which are neighbouring or at the rear, which are on McNeil Street, because they've bought into a suburb because of the large blocks,
the exclusivity,
proximity, beautiful streets, beautiful houses, then to be maybe overlooked into their backyard. I can understand how they must feel as well. As development is always going to be, there's always going to be 2 sides.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I guess the state government has a few things to say about that, though. I think we're in the first vintage now in many, many years or decades where it seems like there is a thumb that has been put down on the table by Minister Saffioti saying, I'm not really bothered by what you think over here. These things are getting done because they need to be done. Get used to it.
Well, I think the worst type of leader is one that doesn't lead. So a decision has to be made. I think consultation would help a leader, the right decision, and I'm sure that you're not going to have all parties agreeing.
No, you never will.
That the outcome is the right outcome. So, to make that decision, I take my hat off to anybody that makes a decision, but can also see that perhaps a little bit more consultation with people that are within the suburb talking about what they want.
Of course, yeah. And because those are the people that have invested into the suburb and have done so not just financially, but with their lifestyle for decades, for generations, especially in the West. There's some very, long family histories in these suburbs. And you have to respect that. On the same side, one thing that I was taught quite a while ago by an old boss of mine was if you want to get things done very slowly, start a committee.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So there has to be a balance, I guess.
Yeah.
With regards to, I guess, that western suburbs, your forecast into the future, do you see any semblance between what's gone on in the last 5 or 6 years in those more premium suburbs in the eastern states and really the blue sky opportunities in terms of profitability, really, in buying into the western suburbs? If you think about these locations, these blocks, you compare them to the East Coast, in some cases, they're a third of the price for the same lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, I tend to think the population drives the property prices. I can always remember selling a house in a part of Nedlands when someone said to me, they said, I think what you're asking here is like a Sydney price. And I said, well, where in Sydney can you be 5 minutes out of the city, 8 minutes down to the beach, and still be sub 2 million? The Western Suburbs is really unique. When I look what's available at the moment, our stock levels are very, very low. I then reflect upon how many people are coming through home opens, how many inquiries I'm getting online, and then I talk to people which have got businesses up in Karratha and up north. I think West Australia's, and we haven't seen any growth. So I think West Australia is probably a little bit different to our neighbours on the East Coast. I think that we're poised for perhaps a better 2021 and 2022 than they are.
You'd hope so. Mate, let's move on to the suburb spotlight. We'll speak specifically about Nedlands now.
Yep.
A suburb that I've personally invested into, a suburb that I think is, in my opinion, undervalued for what it is. It's so convenient. You're 1 or 2 traffic lights away from the city.
Certainly
and
one.
Fantastic vista, right? If you live anywhere near the university, it's 1 traffic light and a beautiful 10-minute drive along the river, and you're in the city. So how many places in the world can you do that and be able to buy, I guess, at a price 30-40% cheaper than the suburb next to it, which is Dalkeith?
Yeah, that's pretty incredible, isn't it?
I think Nedlands is a great example of an opportunity for people in that price point to really take advantage, not only in a lifestyle perspective, but also with what we'll talk about soon enough from a development perspective too, because it's really been an untried and untested market there, given the fact it's only just been rezoned. Let's move back into a bit of time. Can you give us some fun facts, Mark? When Nedlands was really established as an allotment back in the day?
When you think about Nedlands, what interests me, as you get closer to the highway, as used to be the Fremantle to Perth Road, the quality of the houses tend to be a lot better. They're certainly a lot older. And then it's hard to think that the golf course, Dalkeith, and parts of the river were perhaps they're all where the where the farmland was. So to me, walking around, yeah, that's right. It's the sticks. It was the cheaper part of the area. So I look at it now, and it's the opposite. Further away you are from the highway, the closer you are to the river, or places like golf courses, the more expensive the square metre rate is.
Explain to me a little bit of that context on the lifestyle, I guess, back 30, 40, 50 years ago. Even Steve's was pumping. Only 15 years ago, the old Steve's was there, and back in the day there was a tram line that ran straight through Broadway as well, wasn't there?
That's right, yeah. I was a regular at Steve's. It was a great hotel. So what's now the Esplanade or the multiplex development, that used to just be a car park, and it was a great hotel. You knew to go there on Thursday, Friday, probably miss Saturday and go there Sunday.
Was it a younger suburb back then?
I've got to say, Trent, I wasn't really actually paying much attention to the suburb. I was just a patron. I was just a blow-in to the Steve's area. But obviously a lot of students, because UWA has been there for a long time. But to me, even back in those days, so we're talking in the 80s. For me, I thought, look, it just felt a very comfortable suburb to live in. When I started my career, I started in Suburbs and Shannon Park, and then I moved to Nedlands, and then we bought a house in Nedlands, and we bought there because it was what I thought, and just to reiterate what you said, it's extremely good value at a per square metre rate. My kids went to school there. We've got surrounded by parks. We've got a golf course. We've got the river. I'm a surfer and avid beach goer. It takes me 8 minutes in the morning. Quite often take my kids when they were young into the city on Christmas Eve, a 10-minute bus ride.
Kings Park's just across the road.
Yeah, so it's got everything going for it. And then on top of that, we've got diversity. We've got small blocks. We've got mid-sized blocks. So we've got 450 square metre blocks. We've got 700 square metre blocks, and then we've got 1,000 square metre blocks.
Well, let's focus on that for a second. Is a lot of people wouldn't recognise that Nedlands isn't just south of the highway.
Yeah, that's right.
There's also a Nedlands between the highway and the railway.
Yeah.
Is there a difference in culture, in price point, in socioeconomics?
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
A lot of people won't own up to living north of the highway. I've always been north of the highway because that's what I could afford. But as it turns out, for our lifestyle, it was beneficial being on the north side.
What's the difference?
Well, there are differences. Why is there a difference in value? The only thing that I can say is that if you were to, the quality of housing is similar, But I'd have to say that south of the highway, you've got some reasonably prominent schools on that side.
Primary schools?
We got Loretto, and you've also got Nedlands Primary, which is up either number 1 or 2 in the state currently. And then you've got Christchurch. Then you've got the river, you've got the golf course, and you've got lots and lots of playing fields. So that is really the main difference. North of the highway, the benefits there is that you don't have to cross the highway to get to Claremont. You're closer to the railway line, which is getting increasingly more important. You've got easy access down to Subiaco and Shenton Park.
And the hospital,
Kings
right?
Park, and, of course, the hospital.
Surely there's a big contingent of people living north
Enormous.
of that medico background.
Yeah, enormous. I think when the hospital came in, I think they brought in something like 12,500 new workers when the Children's Hospital started. So you can imagine that does have an impact, particularly if you're buying a house as an investment. You know that there's a very, very good chance you're going to get a doctor or someone who's at least, or nurse or someone who's just working at the hospitals.
One thing I think might be underrepresented from my perspective, and I might be missing the mark here, but I would have thought there would be a larger contingent of student accommodation facilities around in Nedlands, just generally around the Nedlands Crawley area, just given that our biggest university is right there as well. Is the issue is that the planning up to this point has been prohibitive, or the price point has been prohibitive, or people just prefer to live somewhere else if they're a student? If I was a student and I had more opportunity, I probably would have been looking to live in a share house, back in the day in Nedlands. It seems like there's not that much opportunity.
No, look, I think there's quite a few. I mean, I lived in a share house in Nedlands and Crawley. I think that at the City of Perth is also going through a change of zoning. Now that the City of Perth just took over. Not just recently, but in recent years, took over what used to be the Subiaco Council, which was the city side of Broadway. So that is now the City of Perth. And the University of WA have also bought up lots of land there. So I wouldn't say that it'll happen immediately, but certainly in the near future, I think we'll start to see some more student accommodation.
Can you characterise for us, if you can, a stereotypical buyer right now for you in Nedlands and a stereotypical seller? What's the background? Are they old enough to have a family?
Young family with 2 kids looking for a bigger block, coming from Subiaco and Shenton Park area, and they have somewhere between 1.5 and just over 2 to spend. They will sell their property in Subiaco or Shenton Park for around about the 1.2 to 1.5. So that jump is significant enough to make it worthwhile, because there's stamp duty always in every transaction, so the jump's got to be significant enough. So that's what they're looking for. They would prefer to buy something which is structurally all done, but happy to do some work internally.
Well, that's a reality with a suburb like Nedlands. There's a lot of good old properties with good bones, but a lot of the time the ones with value, the value is probably there because there needs to be a bit of a renovation as well. Yeah,
absolutely, because what they're doing is they're paying predominantly land value, and the accommodation is there as a bit of a bonus. And, what they realise, the smart buyer realises that to actually get employer builder to get them on site to build those 4 or 5 new rooms is going to cost today's prices. So even if it's built 20 years ago, it's far better value just to refit internally than actually add on. So, and the seller of that home is someone that is maybe 55 to 65. Their kids, from having 3 kids at home, they've now perhaps just got 1, and even that one is going to be may come back, may stay or may go. So now they're looking, okay. So I've been working. I'm a business owner.
Probably at the peak of their career. In their 50s?
In their peak,
yep.
Yeah, sure. But sort of starting to look at what's going to happen over the next decade for them. So they're starting to go the opposite way. They're going, well, okay, so what can I buy for 2.5? Those sellers they don't necessarily need to have money in their back pocket, but they don't want to go into a big mortgage.
I'll tell you what I purchased in Nedlands. For me, it was all about land value. It was about $1 per square metre rate. I was initially looking in North Perth, having lived around Hyde Park, and thinking it's a great lifestyle, which it is, that North Perth lifestyle, very cosmopolitan, lots of access to cool shops and cafes, and very close to work in the city. But when I was looking at the areas in North Perth that I wanted to get into, especially for a block that was at least 700 square metres, I was paying about $2,000 a square metre at least.
Wow.
And I started looking around going, where else can I buy for $2,000 a square metre? Then I found this suburb called Nedlands, where, I could be very, very close to the river, very, very close to still with regards to driving, minimal traffic lights to get into the city and for work every day. I wouldn't have to sit on Stirling Highway waiting through 4 traffic lights.
Yep.
And I was paying less than $2,000 a square metre for probably a more substantial house as well, and in an area where I thought was very good value for what that was. And that's pretty much the reason I chose Nedlands over one of the more inner city suburbs, is because where I thought that price point should be more like $2,500-3,000 a square metre, it was actually less than those suburbs.
I've been selling for 29 years, and Nedlands has always been known as the cheapest and best value.
I guess I don't understand that. I feel like when things like that don't make sense to hopefully a logical person, for me, that's why I've purchased into that area. And one of the reasons I think that it's possibly overlooked by people is, as we referenced before at the start of the episode, that lack of coffee culture, cosmopolitan culture. But the timing of the rezoning, which we'll segue into now, I think is really perfect, because the way that they've done it, obviously with a lot of pushback from local residents, is the way they've landed is that it's the main arteries, Stirling Highway and Broadway mainly, that have been massively upzoned to at some point incentivise some real density along there, which will support and invigorate the opportunity for that cafe strip cosmopolitan culture.
Yes, I mean, it'd be great to see that tram coming back along
Wouldn't
Broadway.
that be cool?
Yeah, it'd be very cool, I think. I think it's. I do think it's a fantastic opportunity to draw people, diversify the people that live in Nedlands even more, give people opportunities to live in such a suburb. It does come at a cost, which is always the downside, but it will certainly draw people into that suburb.
Explain to me with a bit more detail for the listeners out today, where has the rezoning been implemented? And what could you be doing with that rezoning?
Okay, so the zoning has been implemented along Broadway, Hampden Road, Stirling Highway, all the way down to Claremont, and along Waratah Avenue. Basically goes to almost the first cross street, which is Edward on one side, and on the other side it is Bedford. That's a very broad sort of spectrum.
The first block back, I guess.
Yep. It is, yep. And the higher zoning is right on the highway. It goes from, it wouldn't be right to say unlimited height, but certainly, maybe 10 stories down to R160, which is 5, and then down to R60, which is 3.
So what are they expecting to incentivise? What if we come back 30 years from now, what do you think Stirling Highway and Broadway will look like?
Broadway, I certainly do hope they have some sort of light rail which goes there, perhaps a better traffic system, so people aren't driving so fast down the street, people interacting with each other, so that takes intelligent design when it comes to developing a mixture of uses, so that we have perhaps just a crossover of restaurants, cafes, shops, offices, so we actually get like a real vibe in that part of the suburb. Along the highway, well, as I said to you off air, is that one of the greatest things that I see as I drive up and down the highway is all the trees. Hopefully they are either replaced or saved, so that the suburb still has that feel about it, because it's still a gateway into something like the western suburbs. I hope to see downsizers living their dream, and that is finding smaller blocks to live on, not necessarily townhouses, not necessarily apartments. And I think that's really what I hope to see.
More specifically for me, what I think we'll see is some level of 5 to 10 story apartment buildings along Stirling Highway, some coffee shops, a couple of actual grocery stores like your Woolworths and Aldi, and then down to that first block, a lot of townhouses. Nearly all townhouses, all the old houses would have been taken away by that point. A couple of more 3 or 4 story apartment buildings where a couple of blocks have been amalgamated. And on Broadway, I hope we see, some 6, 7 story apartment buildings with cafes and hairdressers and things like that on the bottom. Broadway, definitely, as you said, the street itself restructured to not be a rally car chicane street where those. I mean,
not that you would drive like that.
Well, I certainly did when I was about 20. I remember being at uni, whipping around there.
There's about 4 or 5 chicanes. Yeah,
yeah, honestly, they're quite fun. But yeah, that needs to be restructured, and certainly you could see, if there's enough people around there, that road, for example, being paved and turned into more of a pedestrian first sort of street.
Yeah, that's it. Look,
wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that Look, I don't have any influence or very little influence, but I'd like to see if they're going to allow redevelopment of those blocks. I think that I would love to be able to see or make it a part of that redevelopment that they give back to the street so that they can create, just a streetscape rather than just develop 7 stories, as you said, and leave the street as it is. I just don't. I think that's only one side of the development.
And finally, I think Basement on Broadway is demolished and replaced with something that isn't as crusty and old.
So you're talking about Broadway Fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well,
that place has had no love for decades.
Wow. Ouch. Look, I think that you should go there on the university days. It really pumps full of students. It's quite different. You certainly don't want a suburb which looks the same. So, and I guess when I look at places like the western suburbs, I think that is one of the benefits, is that it's a little bit more eclectic. You might have an old house which is 100 years old, and then you might have a new house which is only 5 years old. You might have Broadway Fair, but you might have something which is architecturally right at the edge. I think that's important. So I think that's what makes one of the differences of living in the western suburbs for me, is that you have this eclectic sort of mix of these old and new, and the common trait is you've got so many trees.
It's a very green area.
Yeah.
That's very true. And I think with the vogue of planning policies these days, which are much more green first, much more trees first, I think we'll see, luckily, a lot throughout the development that's going to happen through the pockets of Nedlands, especially, that have been rezoned. You'll see a lot more tree protection as a part of the thought process for developers, and I think that's a good thing, because one of the issues, one of the downfalls and negatives of some of the councils, more like Stirling, for example, that went gung-ho over the last 30 years, is there isn't a tree in sight.
Yeah, that's a real shame.
And it's a real issue. Properties are a lot less valuable when you're boiling at 40 degrees out on the street looking at them.
Yeah, they certainly are. And I think that being at home opens or showing people through at private inspections, and the birds are in the trees making their noise, I think that's, I often say, just hold for a second, we'll just stop and just listen. And they always accuse me of having the bird noise playing somewhere, but no, they're real birds.
Yeah, the loudspeakers going.
Yeah. But I just wanted, just to talk a bit further on the rezoning. It has caused a lot of upset for a lot of people, and I think that is a real shame that that's happened. I'm sure if the Nedlands Council had their run at it again, they perhaps may have looked at it or may have done things differently. I think there are people which have potentially had their properties devalued, they've had their lives changed completely, and this is always, I think that is sad that that's happened for some people.
On the flip side, what I've noticed is those properties that are one block within Stirling Highway, those properties have all gone up $300,000-$500,000.
They have, you're right.
Some more.
Yeah.
And those properties weren't very nice, a lot of them. Some were, and they've gone up, but the ones that were land value have gone up nearly $1 million for no reason other than the rezoning in the space of a year.
Absolutely, 100%.
And they're winners.
Which is great, because, and what's happened there is that the people would only, when people would come to me and they'd say, hey, listen, we're looking for a house in Nedlands, I'd say, how much do you have? And they'd say, look, just over 1 or 1.2 or 1.1. And I said, well, you can go south, you can go north of the highway. No, we don't want to do north of the highway. It must be south of the highway. They were typically buying that first block, so which is bordered by Edward and Jenkins.
Yeah.
So they were buying the cheapest of the cheap south of the highway, which was important to them. South of the highway address was important to them.
Now they're the most expensive properties in Nedlands.
Well, what they are is that where they would have been worth maybe 1.2 or 1.3, now they're selling for 1.6, 1.8, and 2. So they have definitely had a win.
They've done well. Last question, Mark.
Yep.
Mark Anderson, what is the median house price in Nedlands, and what would you do with it if I gave that to you in your back pocket today?
Okay, so the median price, let's say the median price last year for 2019 was just over 1.6. The median price currently, as it stands, for houses we're talking about in Nedlands, is up in the 1.7s.
So we've seen growth.
Absolutely. First half of the year, that's what we were seeing.
Yep. And so what will you be doing with 1.7s?
I would be buying myself a land value property as close to the in the Melvista ward as I could.
A Melvista ward?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, the Melvista ward is quite a special part of Nedlands.
Give us a bit more detail. Give us some bounds.
Okay, so Melvista ward is, you've got Princess Road on the northern side, and you've got Melvista Avenue on the southern side.
And the river on...
And the river is also on the southern side.
Yep.
So that ward there what it does is it places you close to all the ovals, the golf course, and the golf course really is a part of Nedlands, which is, from my point of view, is equally as attractive as the river.
So what streets are we talking about there? That's a very specific
Okay, so
pocket.
we're talking about really from Archdeacon Street. Well, we're talking Hillway, but the part that I'm talking about is from Bruce Street, Archdeacon, Tyrrell, Webster, Thomas Webster, Stanley, Florence, all the way up to College Park.
So the university side of Nedlands on the south side.
Yeah, that's where I'll be spending my money, because those blocks. We talk about the blocks with the development sites are growing in value because of what they offer. You'd have to think that the blocks which are the furthest away from development will also see growth because of what they don't have.
Yeah.
Because you can't be developed. So they're at both ends of the spectrum.
That's a very considered thought process there, Mark. And I think obviously you've thought very much about how this rezoning is going to affect houses both up and down in this suburb.
Absolutely. And, that's what I think. And I certainly don't think it's a negative that we have the blocks close to the highway being redeveloped. In fact, I see that as also, if I had an extra $1.5 million, I'll be buying one of those as well.
Yeah, cool. Mark, thank you very much for coming in, mate.
Thanks, Trent.
It's a fantastic episode, I think, where we've got some holistic views both on what's going on, what life's like in the western suburbs for homeowners, especially those looking to buy in, and also more specifically your suburb, Nedlands. Thank you very much, mate, and we'll have you in again soon.
Thanks, Trent.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!